Have you ever misunderstood something that has been said? Or the other way around? How many times have you asked yourself what somebody means with a certain word? Today you will learn about Halliday's experiential metafunction. But first, let's take a look at this piece of Mafalda's comic. So I guess we should start it over again. Perhaps it'll work this time. I agree. So what's the game about? Game? Man, we're talking about humanity here. Professor Martin believes that the strength of a functional grammar is that it looks at the grammar from the point of view of meaning, and so the grammar gives you a good semantic and pragmatic interpretation of what is going on in the speech or text. This corresponds to the effect caused by the emission of a message in the mind of the interlocutor, where the meaning of the message can be perceived from various points of view, after having been the object of a particular reasoning by each one of the members that make up the discussion circle. Mafalda's father understood the dialogue in a different way. What he thought they wanted to say is not what they really wanted to say. That is where the systemic functional grammar plays a very important role, since it does not focus only on understanding the reason for the message that is being transmitted, but rather on finding the reason why said message is being communicated in that way. There can be several reasons why a certain message is exposed in a certain way, and that is the main goal of the systemic functional grammar. Halliday affirms that grammar maintains a more semantic and pragmatic orientation. It is a functional orientation. Therefore, he understands that the natural language forms represents a communicative tool. According to Halliday, language has changed to satisfy human needs, and it is as it is because of the uses it has had. That is, its organization is functional and not arbitrary. This theory explains how language is used and points out the characteristics of the system by its uses. Since the name systemic comes from the technical term system, it represents a theory of paradigmatic relations, in contrast to structure, which defines syntagmatic relations. The system implies thinking of language as a network of interconnected options that the speaker has on his hands to produce texts, and from which he chooses those that are appropriate to the record of a certain communicative situation in which he is immersed. The functional term refers to the central characteristics of language. Its function is instrumental, since language is means by which human beings interact, exchanging meanings and construct reality. Clearly, Halliday's thought about language is located on a pure social level, understanding it as a system by which meanings are created and exchanged, where the recognition of how language creates meanings and how it allows them to be exchanged, which is a very important role. Halliday states that functional grammar has three purposes or three types of meanings, which he called metafunctions. The interpersonal metafunction, which recognizes that language is also involved in positioning identities or relationships within communicative discourse. Ideational metafunction that deals with the way the world is represented through language, and as such most closely corresponds to the conventional ideas of language and meaning. Textual metafunction that describes the use of language to structure a text or to indicate structural relationships with other texts. But today, we will describe one of the branches of ideational metafunctions, which is the experiential metafunction. Thompson G. says that from the experiential perspective, language comprises a set of resources for referring to entities in the world and the ways in which those entities act or relate to each other. At the simplest level, language reflects our view of the world as consisting of going-ons involving things that may have attributes and which go on against background details of place, time, manner, among others. This means that our experience of reality is captured in terms of processes: happening, doing, sensing, meaning, being, and becoming. These processes constitute the transitivity system of language, which belongs to the experiential metafunction. In transitivity analysis, then, we explore how language constructs our experience of the world around us. In particular, it refers to a system for describing the whole class, focusing on the small number of types of processes that can be identified along with their own participants. Now you must be wondering, what are those processes? Who are those participants? Remember that the class represents the content of our experiences. Answering the question, who does what to whom? Systemic functional grammar refers to the system as describing the whole clause and does not use the labels subject, verb, and object. Instead, different functional labels are given to participants, processes, and circumstances of each process type. Therefore, we have that according to Alfiana, processes are expressed by verbal groups, participants by nominal groups, and circumstances by adverbial groups or prepositional phrases. Now let's talk about each one of those labels. Process. According to Blur and Blur, processes are central to transitivity. The process centers on that part of the clause that is realized by the verbal group, but it can also be regarded as what going-ons are represented in the whole clause. Here is where we are going to put our attention, because remember that the full meaning of a clause will be given by the process. There are 6 principal processes types in transitivity system: material, mental, relational, behavioral, verbal, and existential. Let's start with the material process. This is related to actions and events, things that happen, and people or other actors do things or make them happen. They are the processes of the external world. You can prove a material process with what did the actor do or what happened, because the material process involves dynamic verbs. The mental process has to do with affection, cognition, perception, or desideration. It is a partly kind of replay of the outer, recording it, reacting to it, reflecting on it, and partly a separate awareness of our states of being. It's the process of consciousness. Relational process is about identifying and classifying. This type of process is more frequent than mental. Relational processes usually involve the be verb. Now, these are the main processes, but there are some others that are placed between them. These are the behavioral, verbal, and existential processes. On the borderline between material and mental are the behavioral processes, which represent the outer manifestation of the inner workings, the acting out of the processes of consciousness. Example, people are laughing. On the borderline of mental and relational are the symbolic relationships constructed in human consciousness and enacted in the form of language, like saying and meaning. This is the verbal process. For example, somebody said that every fourth African is a Nigerian. And finally, the existential process are the ones on the borderline between the relational and the material. These are processes concerned with existence, by which phenomena of all kinds are simply recognized to be, to exist, or to happen. For example, today, there's Christianity in the South. In this chart is summarized all the processes and the actions involved in each one of them, so we can understand better how to analyze the clause based on each of them. Starting from the 3 main processes, then we have other characteristics that reflects the action of the participants. Now let's talk about the participants. In interpersonal terms, this is usually subject. There can be up to 2 other participants, complements in interpersonal terms. Each process can have different types of participants. For material processes, the doer of this type of action is called the actor, and those that also affect or are being done to another participant are called the goal. For mental, the person in whose mind the mental process occurs is called the sensor, and the kind of entity that can fill the role of the other participant in a mental process is called the phenomenon. For relational processes, we can have 4 types of participants. If the process is identifying, the participants are token and value. If the process is attributive, the participants are carried and attribute. For behavioral processes, the main participant is the behavior, but may sometimes involve a behavior. Behavioral processes are typically intransitive, involving only the behavior as participants. If there are 2 participants, the second participant is behavior. For verbal process, the participants are the sayer, who is the addresser, the receiver, who is the addressee, the verbiage, which is the content of what is said or indicated. For existential process, there is only one participant in such clauses, the existent, reflected in the word there, which is needed as subject, but it has no experiential meaning. In a sense, its function is to avoid the need for or the possibility of a second participant in the clause. According to Ping-Aldin, circumstantial elements add information about time, place, manner, and reason. They can be proved with where, why, how, and when. There are 9 main types of circumstantial elements: location, extent, manner, cause, contingency, accompaniment, role, matter, and angle. Let's define each one of these circumstances. For location or point in time, we answer the question when. We answer the question where for space. An extent or line again in time. It refers to duration and the space. Another familiar category is manner, the how category. The most frequent type is quality, usually expressed by ly adverbs such as quickly and easily. But the category also includes means and comparison and degree. The category of cause is a fairly complex one. It includes reason to answer the question why and as a result of what. It includes purpose and behalf. When we talk about contingency, we need to mention condition and concession. Condition relates to the circumstances in which a process occurs. For example, in the event of a fire, the building should be evacuated. Concession is a kind of negated cause, in that it expresses a circumstance that might have led to a particular outcome, but did not. For example, despite his exhaustion, he hauled himself over the wall. Accompaniment. It's a circumstantial that answers the question who, what with. For example, she's sitting on the grass over there with her brother. Finally, we have the role, the matter, and the angle. The role is a circumstantial that falls into 2 groups. The first one is guise, basically answer the question what as, and the second comprise product. It's a circumstantial that answers the questions what into. The matter answers the questions what about, like if you said I'm trying not to think about the accident. The angle answers the questions from what point of view. The angle realized especially by according to or just to. Now, to understand all this theory, it's better to take a look to some examples, so you can have a clearer view of how experiential metafunction works.
Hello everyone, now we'll be showing some examples about this metafunction. We got the experiential perspective. If we use functional labels, for example labels that indicate the role played by each element of the representation, one can express what we have said about the content of clauses in terms of processes involving participants in certain circumstances. Let's see an example. They slowly unlocked the front door. It has participants, circumstance, and process. As you can see right here, they would be participant, slowly for circumstance, unlock for process, and the front door would be participant as well. I'll be explaining some examples with the different meanings of the word felt in the experiential metafunction. As sometimes happens, you'll see right here that felt is the same in many ways. It's pronounced the same way, you would describe it grammatically the same way, it's a verb, it's the past tense, past simple, but if you look at it, you know that it means something different. We could express this word by saying, okay, I felt the wood means that I touched it, and felt that I was at a crossroads, it's regarding to thinking, and felt tired has to do with sensation. But how could we talk about this in a precise way? Well, in the first case, would be described as being a material process. The word used right here is process because you're doing something, you're touching something is happening. And the second one is a mental process because it's happening in your head. Now for the last one, felt is called a relational process because there's no action happening. All that it does is relate, it's connected somehow. That's what the experiential metafunction does. It gives us a tool for talking about what language means. The most salient types of process are those involving physical actions, running, throwing, scratching, cooking, sitting down, and so on. These are called material processes. A traditional definition of a verb is a doing word, and this describes such processes reasonably. The doer of this type of action is called the actor. Any material process has an actor, even though the actor may not actually be mentioned in the clause. Material processes can be divided into those that represent the action as involving only the actor and those that also affect or are being done to another participant. This second participant is called the goal, since the action is, in a sense, directed at this participant and circumstances that add extra information. As we can see in the example, we have some words for actor. He, the young girl, Edward, and her mother. For process material, we have had been shaven, bounded, was sawn, and smashed. For goal, we have wood, the glass, and for circumstance, out of the gate. However, the actor may also be an inanimate or abstract entity, and the goal may of course be human. Let me show you some examples. For actor, we have the car, coarse grass, the unhappiness, the fire, scores of tiny brambles, the pounding rhythm. For process material, slithered, was growing, disappeared, had destroyed, scratched, and shook. For goal, everything, him, walls, and floor. And for circumstance, of the road, here and there. A material process is a process of doing, happening, and the actor is the key participant. You can prove a material process with what did the actor do or what happened. These labels for the participants are perhaps easiest to understand when the actor is human and the goal, if there is one, is inanimate, as for example, Sam swallowed the ping pong ball by mistake. We have participant actor, Sam, process material swallowed, participant goal the ping pong ball, and circumstance banner by mistake. Now for the second example, the doctor gave Sam some laxative. Participant actor, the doctor, process material gave, participant recipient Sam, and participant go some laxative. Mental process. The simple functional description of a verb as a doing word did not by any means fit all processes, which suggests that we need to establish other categories apart from the material processes. There are clear differences between something that goes on in the external world and something that goes on in the internal world of the mind, and there are many verbs that refer to these mental processes of thinking, imagining, liking, wanting, seeing, etc. For mental processes, on the other hand, the most natural present tense is a simple form. For example, they like salmon. And it is often difficult to construct a context in which the continuous form sounds natural. This is one reason why the well-known advertising slogan, "I'm loving it," it's much more memorable than "the more natural I love it." In teaching English as a foreign language, this feature of the mental process verbs is often presented as an odd exception, but in fact, it is an inherent part of their grammar. The mental processes has to do with affection, cognition, perception, or desideration is a fancy term for desiring. In this case, the participants are sensor, which is the one who feels emotionally, thinks and perceives; phenomenon, that which is felt emotionally, thought about, or perceived. Here are some examples. I hate curly underarm hair. We have the participant sensor I, the process mental hate, the participant phenomenon curly underarm hair. This will be affection. Now the second one. His curly underarm hair amazed me. Participant phenomenon, his curly underarm hair. Process mental, amazed. And for participant sensor, me. This would be cognition. And for the last one, I saw his curly underarm hair. Participant sensor, I. Process mental, saw. And participant phenomenon, his curly underarm hair. This will belong to perception. Relational processes obligatory require two participants. You cannot and do not have a relational process with only one participant. These processes are concerned with being, possessing, or becoming. The relational processes is either identifying or attributive. If the process is identifying, the participants are token and value. But which is which? If the identifying process is able to undergo passivization, then in the active form, the subject is always the token. The value, of course, is the complement. Let's see some examples in here. Today is Oktoberfest drinking contest. Participant token, today. Process, relational, identifying is. And the participant value, it's Oktoberfest drinking contest. A second example. The drinking champion is Robert. We have the participant value, the drinking champion, the process, relational identifying is, and the participant token, Robert. Now, an attributive process can never undergo passivization. For the participants, you will have carrier and attribute and can also have circumstance. Let's see some examples. Robert was fantastic during the Oktoberfest drinking contest. Participant carrier, Robert. Process, relative attribute was. Participant attribute, fantastic. And during the Oktoberfest drinking contest, circumstance, time. Example number 2. Robert has a shapely rib cage. Participant carrier, Robert. Process, relative attribute has. And participant attribute, shapely rib cage. Behavioral processes have few obvious grammatical features that set them apart. and are largely identified on semantic grounds. They relate to specifically human physiological processes. They allow us to distinguish between purely mental processes and the outward physical signs of those processes. The main participant is behavior, but it may sometimes involve a behavior. Behavioral processes are typically intransitive, involving only the behavior as participant. If there are two participants, the second participant is behavior. This process is a hybrid process, a material plus mental process, because it is part mental. The part behavioral process involves verbs that are clearly psychological, and because it is part material, the behavioral process permits the progressive, and the clause can be proved with what did the behavior do. For example, the sore losers glared at the winner of the race. Participant behavior, the sore losers. Process behavioral, glared. And at the winner of the race, participant behavior. They're answering to the question, what did the sore losers do? The sore losers glared at the winner of the race. The existential process is the easiest of the lot. It involves existential constructions which are introduced by an empty there in subject position. The typical verb that is used is the be verb. So every time you see an existential construction, you have an existential process. Another simple diagnostic is that the progressive is forbidden in the existential process. And there is also only one participant for this process, and it's called the existent. The existent is simply that which is construed existentially. It expresses the mere existence of an entity without predicating anything else of it. For example, we have right here, once upon a time there was a weird grammarian. Once upon a time is circumstance time. Was process existential, and a weird grammarian process existent. Verbal processes include all modes of expressing and indicating. The content of what is said or indicated can be realized as a full projected clause, a participant, verbiage, or circumstance matter. We have three types of participants: sayer, which is the addresser; receiver, which is the addressee or the entity targeted by the saying; and the verbiage, which is the content of what is said or indicated. Right here we have two examples. The first one, the X-ray shows a small lump in Sam's throat. The X-ray would be participant sayer. Shows, process verbal. A small lump, participant verbiage. And in Sam's throat, circumstance location. For the second example, the doctor expressed some concern. We have the doctor as participant sayer, expressed for process verbal, and some concern for participant verbiage. Okay, let's try your knowledge with some easy exercises. How many can you guess? Let's see. Question number 1. There is a man at the door. What would you say? Is it a mental process, a material process, or an existential process? Okay, a few more seconds to go. That's correct. Let's go ahead. Question number 2. David saw what happened. Is it A, B, or C? Oh, I'm sorry. That's not the right answer. It was a mental process. Question number 3. Adam bought some curry? A, B, or C? Okay, a few more seconds to go. That's correct. Question number 4. Joe sang the song. Is it a behavioral process, a mental process, or a material process? You're correct. And now for the last question. David liked the headphones. Is it A, B, or C? What are you thinking about? Do you remember what we talked about? Let's see. You're correct. You did an excellent job. So thank you so much all for participating, and I hope you enjoyed our presentation.